Pathetic boy. You never had a head for success, my dad told me. Not long after, I was trending nationwide. I'd just been announced as one of the youngest male founders on Wall Street. At the family barbecue, everyone went silent when I rolled up in my Ferrari. My name is Joshua Langford. I'm 23 years old, and I built a financial technology startup from scratch in Charleston, South Carolina. Where I'm from, success means calloused hands and a sunburned neck. My father, Nathan, ran a landscaping business for 30 years and measured a man's worth by physical labor. When I chose finance over following him into the family business, the disappointment in his eyes cut deeper than any shovel could dig. For 3 years, I'd been working on an algorithm that could predict market trends better than the big firms. Nights, weekends, holidays, all spent hunched over my laptop while my friends were out living their lives. My dad would walk past my room, shake his head, and mutter something about boys playing with computers. Each time I'd work another hour just to prove him wrong. Last month I overheard him talking to my uncle at our family dinner. "Joshua will be back mowing lawns by summer," he said, laughing. That boy couldn't sell water in a desert. I didn't say anything, just ate my dinner, helped clean up, and drove back to my apartment to finalize the biggest deal of my life. I grew up watching my father build his landscaping company from a single truck to a fleet of 20. Every summer from age 12 I worked for him, cutting grass, planting trees, hauling mulch under the Carolina sun. He taught me the value of hard work, but somewhere along the way he confused hard work with hard labor. When I got accepted to University of South Carolina's business program, he barely acknowledged it. "College boys think they know everything until they meet the real world," he said, handing me a $20 bill for the road. That was his version of a send-off. My mother, Denise, was different. She slipped me $500 she'd saved from her teaching salary and whispered, "Go make something of yourself that makes you happy." She never said it in front of my dad. During sophomore year, I developed an algorithm that caught the attention of one of my professors. "This could revolutionize how regular people invest," he told me. I dropped out the next semester to focus on building it into something real. When I called home to explain, my mother cried. My father hung up. For the next 2 years, I lived off ramen and worked out of a tiny apartment with 2 roommates. One venture capitalist after another turned me down. "Too young," they said. "Not enough experience." Each rejection email I'd print out and tape to my wall, not as motivation, as a reminder of who didn't believe in me. Thomas Blake, my roommate from freshman year, stuck by me. He'd bring me food when I forgot to eat, proofread my pitches, and never once questioned whether I'd make it. "You're the smartest person I know," he'd say. "Just don't forget us little people when you're rich." Meanwhile, my father's comments grew sharper. At Thanksgiving, he introduced me to his clients as my son who's still figuring things out. At Christmas, he suggested I apply for a manager position at his company, since that computer thing isn't working out. I noticed how he'd suddenly change the subject whenever I tried to explain my work, how he'd interrupt me mid-sentence to point out a neighbor's nicely manicured lawn, how he never once asked to see what I was building. On my 23rd birthday, I got an email from Blackwater Capital, one of the largest hedge funds on the East Coast. They wanted to license my technology exclusively for $14 million. I read the email 17 times, standing in my kitchen, coffee growing cold in my hand. I called Thomas first. He screamed so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Then I called my mother. She cried again, but different tears this time. I didn't call my father. 3 days later, I signed the contracts in New York. The Blackwater executives took me to dinner at a restaurant where the menu had no prices. The CEO, a woman named Patricia Donovan, raised her glass. Everyone clinked glasses. I smiled, but all I could think about was my father's voice. "Pathetic boy, you never had a head for success." That night in my hotel room, I got a text from my cousin Evan, the only person in my family who ever showed interest in what I was building. "Just saw the Wall Street Journal article. Holy shit, Josh, you're famous." I opened my laptop. There it was. My face, my company. My story splashed across financial news sites. 23-year-old dropout lands 8-figure deal with Wall Street giant. The article mentioned my age 3 times, as if it were the most remarkable thing about me. I closed the laptop and stared out at the New York skyline. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I just felt clear like fog lifting off the harbor back home. I knew exactly what I needed to do. The next morning I walked into a Ferrari dealership wearing jeans and a t-shirt. The salesman ignored me until I mentioned the price range I was considering. 2 hours later I drove out in a red Ferrari Roma. Not because I particularly wanted one, but because I needed a message that couldn't be misinterpreted. I didn't call ahead before driving home to Charleston. I knew my father's annual Memorial Day barbecue would be happening, the one where he invited all his clients, employees, and extended family to show off his success. I timed my arrival for exactly 2 o'clock, when everyone would be gathered in the backyard. As I pulled into the driveway, the rumble of the engine drew eyes before the car was even visible. I parked next to my father's pickup truck, the one he'd always been so proud of, and took a deep breath. This wasn't about revenge. This was about finally being seen. I stepped into the backyard carrying nothing but my car keys. The conversation stopped like someone had hit a pause button. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stood at the grill, spatula frozen in mid-flip. I walked toward him, feeling everyone's eyes burning into my back. My father recovered quickly, putting on the smile he used for clients. He assumed I'd borrowed the car to make an entrance. More laughter from the guests. I pulled the title from my back pocket and handed it to him. His face changed as he read it. He folded it carefully and handed it back, suggesting I must have rich friends who trust me with their toys. Then he turned back to the grill like nothing had happened. Throughout the afternoon I tried to talk to him. Really talk. Each time he deflected. When I mentioned the deal, he changed the subject to landscaping contracts. When I tried to explain the technology, he suddenly needed to refill the cooler. When his business partner asked me about the Wall Street Journal article, my father interrupted with comments about exaggerating journalists. By evening, most guests had left. I found my father in his office doing paperwork like he always did after hosting. When I tried to talk about my company, he didn't even look up. He said I got lucky with some computer thing and that it didn't make me special. When I countered that $14 million isn't luck, he finally looked at me, eyes narrow with resentment. He pointed to a photo on his wall, him at 20 standing next to his first truck. "That's real work. That's real success," he said. When I tried to explain that what I built was real too, he leaned forward and predicted I'd blow through the money in a year before the Wall Street sharks spit me out. Then he said I'd come begging for a job, and he'd have to explain why his son couldn't hack it in the real world. I left his office without another word. In the kitchen, my mother was washing dishes. She tried to tell me he was proud but didn't know how to show it. I shook my head. "No, Mom. He's not proud. He's threatened." The next morning I got a call from my cousin Evan. My uncle was telling everyone my deal fell through, and I'd lied about everything, even claiming I'd rented the Ferrari to show off. Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger, just certainty. I spent the next week in Charleston, staying at a hotel downtown rather than at my parents' house. I met with lawyers, financial advisors, and the team I was building, but in the background I was hearing things. Thomas texted that my father had come by the apartment looking for me, asking questions about where the money was going. My aunt called to ask if I was in legal trouble with those New York people. Even Patricia from Blackwater reached out because someone claiming to be my father had called their office asking for details about our agreement. I drove to my parents' house on a Tuesday afternoon when I knew my father would be working. My mother let me in, nervous energy in her movements as she made coffee. When I asked what was going on with Dad, she wrapped her hands around her mug and explained that my success challenged everything he'd built his identity around. Then came the revelation that hit me harder than I expected. The landscaping business was struggling, had been for years. The new landscaping chains were undercutting his prices, and he couldn't compete. He hadn't told me because of pride. In his mind, if he admitted my way worked, it meant his way failed. I left my mother with a promise to fix things. But as I drove away, I realized the problem went deeper than I thought. This wasn't just about my father's pride. It was about his fear. Fear that I represented a future that had no place for men like him. That evening, I called Uncle Frank, my father's younger brother and business partner. We met at a bar downtown. Frank revealed that my father had remortgaged the house 3 years ago, putting everything into the business. New trucks, new equipment, trying to keep up with the big companies. It wasn't working. When I asked why he was telling me this, Frank explained that my father was planning to approach me about investing my computer money in the landscaping business. The irony wasn't lost on me. He doesn't believe my success is real, but he wants my money. Frank sighed and offered the truth I hadn't been able to see. My father believes my success is real. He just can't admit it. He's a proud man who built something from nothing. But the world changed and he didn't. On my way home, I drove past my father's business. The lights were still on. I parked across the street and watched him through the window, hunched over paperwork. For a moment I saw him clearly, not as my father but as a man running out of options, clinging to a past that was disappearing. I realized then that his attacks on me weren't just about resenting my success. They were about using me to explain his failure. If my way was wrong, then his way wasn't failing. It was just underappreciated in a world that no longer valued real work. The next morning I received a text from him. Need to discuss business opportunity. Dinner tomorrow 7 p.m. I texted back one word. Yes. I didn't go to dinner. Instead, I spent the day setting things in motion. First, I called Patricia at Blackwater for information on landscaping companies in the Charleston area, specifically which ones were acquisition targets and which were expanding. By noon, I had a list of the 3 biggest players in the region. By 3 o'clock, I had meetings scheduled with 2 of them. Next, I called a commercial real estate agent about properties suitable for a tech incubator, preferably in Charleston's old industrial district. The following morning, I met with Greenscape Enterprises, the largest landscaping company in the state. The owner, Harold Jenkins, was expanding aggressively and admitted they'd had their eye on Langford landscaping for a while. Prime service area, loyal customer base. But my father wouldn't even take their calls. I asked what if I could change that. By evening, I had an offer in writing. Greenscape would buy my father's company for $1.2 million. Twice what it was currently worth on paper, with a 5-year employment contract for my father as a regional. His employees would all keep their jobs, with improved benefits. I also had a lease signed on a 15,000 square foot warehouse space that I was converting into the headquarters for my new company. I was bringing my operation back to Charleston. The final piece came together when I hired Evan, who had just graduated with a business degree, as my chief operating officer. When he questioned whether he was qualified, I told him that belief in what we're building matters more than experience. 3 days after missing the dinner with my father, I still hadn't returned his increasingly irritated message. Instead, I walked into his office unannounced, carrying a folder. His face registered anger when he saw me, but I placed the folder on his desk and told him this was more important than dinner. When he mockingly asked if this was my big investment in his company, I explained it was an acquisition offer from Greenscape. The color drained from his face as he accused me of going behind his back. I corrected him. I went ahead of him. The business was failing and we both knew it. This offer would keep his legacy intact. His employees would keep their jobs, and he would stay on as regional manager with profit sharing. He stood up, trembling slightly with anger at what he saw as my attempt to take over the business he built. As I headed for the door, I placed a key on his desk. The key to my Ferrari. Consider it a gift, I said, or an advance. The offer from Greenscape would expire in 48 hours. After that, they would approach his competitors. The next morning, I got a text from my mother. He drove the car that morning. He didn't say a word about it, but he drove it. By evening, my father had called Harold Jenkins at Greenscape. 24 hours later, they had a deal in principle. I watched from a distance, saying nothing, as my father signed away the business he'd built over 40 years.
He looked smaller somehow, sitting at that conference table. But when he walked out, the keys to my Ferrari still in his pocket, his shoulders were straight. 2 months later, I stood on a makeshift stage in my newly renovated headquarters. Around me were 200 people, my employees, local business leaders, journalists, and family members. My father stood in the back, arms crossed, still uncomfortable in spaces like this. I announced the official launch of Horizon Analytics, with a mission to make financial technology accessible to everyone, not just Wall Street firms, and we were proud to be doing it right here in Charleston. I continued with the announcement of our local partnership. Horizon was investing $2 million in Greenscape Regional Holdings, the newly formed parent company of several landscaping businesses, including the former Langford Landscaping. As part of this investment, we were launching a technology initiative to help traditional service businesses compete in the digital economy, and I was pleased to announce that Nathan Langford would be heading this initiative as Director of Traditional Industries. I looked directly at my father for his face was unreadable. I explained that Nathan had built something valuable over 40 years, knowledge that can't be coded into an algorithm, experience that can't be learned in a classroom. By combining his expertise with our technology, we weren't replacing the old with the new. We were building something better than either could be alone. After the presentation, as people mingled and celebrated, my father finally approached me. He observed that I had planned this all along. I replied that I planned to build something that matters. The rest just fell into place. He looked around at the buzzing activity, the employees hurrying past with purpose, the sign with my company's name on the wall. He noted that my name wasn't on the building. I pointed out that neither was his, but everyone knew who built it. For the first time since I was a child, I saw something like respect in his eyes, not approval. We were beyond that now, but recognition, one builder to another. When he held out his hand, I took it. I told him the Ferrari stays with him. A signing bonus. A hint of a smile crossed his face as he informed me he'd already sold it, bought a truck instead, and put the rest in my company's stock. 6 months later, I sat in my office overlooking the Cooper River. On my desk was a framed article from the Charleston Business Journal, local tech firm partners with traditional industries, creating 150 new jobs. My father and I weren't close, probably never would be, but we'd found a different kind of relationship. Once a week we had lunch to discuss the traditional industries program. He'd started bringing in other business owners, plumbers, electricians, carpenters, men like him who were being left behind by technology. They didn't need handouts, he told me. They needed tools that made sense for them. And I listened, really listened, because he was right. The partnership with Greenscape had exceeded everyone's expectations. My father's expertise combined with our technology platform had expanded their business across 3 states. The same employees who once worked for him now had stock options and better health care. My mother had finally quit her teaching job and was traveling, something she'd always wanted to do but never could afford. Thomas had joined the company as our marketing director. Evan was thriving as COO. We'd hired 30 graduates from local colleges, creating a pipeline of talent that didn't need to leave Charleston for opportunity. As for me, I traded proving myself for building something lasting. The $14 million deal that had once seemed like my entire goal was now just the beginning of a much larger story. That evening as I left the office, I passed the wall where we displayed our company values. At the bottom was a new addition, suggested by my father during one of our meetings. Remember whose shoulders you stand on. I walked out to the parking lot where my basic black sedan was parked next to my father's new truck. No luxury cars needed anymore. We both made our points. Driving home along the water, I thought about success, how I'd once defined it as proving my father wrong, and how I now saw it as something we were building together, each in our own way. I'd gotten my revenge, but not how I'd imagined. Not by humiliating him or taking away what he valued, but by creating a future large enough to include his past. By building something neither of us could have built alone. That felt like winning, not against him, but for both of us.